Part 1. The Mountain's Claim. The cold wind cut across the mountain like a knife. Yuna pulled her thermal suit tighter around her body as she climbed higher up the slope. The settlement was far below now, just a small cluster of silver domes against the white landscape. She had been walking for 3 hours, following the tracks in the snow. Yuna was a scientist. She studied animals on this frozen moon called Varus 4. It was her job to learn about the creatures that lived here, to understand how they survived in such a harsh place. Most of the other colonists thought her work was boring, but Yuna loved it. Every day brought new discoveries about life in this strange world. Today she was tracking a family of frost prowlers. These animals looked like large cats, but their fur was different. It sparkled like crystal and caught the light in beautiful ways. The mother prowler had 3 cubs, and Yuna had been watching them for 6 months. At first, the mother would run away whenever Yuna came near. But slowly, day by day, the animal had learned to trust her. Her radio crackled. It was Daeho, her partner back at base camp. Yuna, the readings are not good. The mountain is unstable today. You need to come back. Yuna stopped and looked at the tracks ahead. They were fresh. The prowler family was close. Maybe just over the next ridge. She had never been this close before. Just a little longer, Daeho. I can see their tracks. This is important. The computers say there might be an avalanche. Please, Yuna, come back now. She knew Daeho was right. The smart thing would be to turn around and return to safety. But she had worked so hard to gain the mother prowler's trust. If she could just see them one more time, maybe take some pictures, it would be worth it. 10 minutes. That is all I need. Quote. Before Daeho could answer, Yuna turned off her radio. She knew he would be angry, but she would apologize later. She continued climbing, her boots crunching in the snow. She found them in a small valley between 2 peaks. The mother prowler was lying in the snow, and her 3 cubs were playing nearby. They jumped on each other and rolled in the white powder, making small chirping sounds. Yuna's heart filled with warmth at the sight. She slowly sat down in the snow, making herself small and quiet. The mother prowler looked at her. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then, the animal did something amazing. She stood up and walked toward Yuna. She came within 5 meters, closer than ever before. Yuna held her breath, afraid to move. That was when the mountain screamed. The sound was like thunder, but deeper and more terrible. Yuna looked up and saw the wall of snow rushing down the slope toward her. It was massive. A wave of white death moving faster than anything she had ever seen. She had maybe 3 seconds to live. Her training took over. Her hand slammed the emergency button on her suit. A red beacon started flashing, sending out a distress signal. Then, the avalanche hit her like a train. The world became a spinning chaos of white and cold. Yuna tumbled through the snow, unable to tell which way was up or down. She felt her leg bend in a way it should not bend, and pain exploded through her body. Something hard hit her head, making stars flash in her vision. She tried to scream, but snow filled her mouth. Then, everything stopped. The movement ended, and Yuna found herself buried in darkness. She could not move her arms or legs. The weight of the snow pressed down on her from all sides, crushing and suffocating. For a moment, panic seized her. She was going to die here, alone in the dark, buried under tons of ice. But then her suit's emergency systems activated. Small air jets blew away the snow near her face, creating a tiny pocket of space. The suit's lights turned on. Weak, but enough to see by. Yuna realized she was in a small cave of ice, maybe 2 meters wide. The snow had formed a pocket around her, trapping her, but also giving her space to breathe. She tried to move and gasped in pain. Her left leg was definitely broken. She could feel it, even through the pain medication. Her suit was pumping into her blood. Her suit's display showed multiple warnings. The thermal system was damaged. The radio was not working. The emergency beacon was active, but its signal was too weak to get through all the ice above her. Yuna knew the truth. No one would find her in time. The avalanche had buried her too deep. Even if they sent rescue teams, they would never locate her before her air ran out or the cold killed her. She had maybe 2 days if she was very lucky. That was when she heard the crying. It was a small sound, high and frightened. Yuna turned her head, ignoring the pain, and saw them in the corner of her ice cave. The 3 frost prowler cubs were huddled together, shaking with fear and cold. The avalanche had swept them into the same pocket as her. They were separated from their mother, alone, and terrified. The cubs looked at her with eyes that reflected her suit's lights. They were so young, barely 3 months old. Without their mother's warmth, they would freeze to death in hours. Already their crystal fur was losing its shine, a sign that they were getting too cold. Yuna looked at her suit's power display. She had enough energy to keep herself warm for maybe 48 hours. The thermal blanket in her emergency kit could keep her alive even longer if she used it. That was her best chance for survival. Wait for rescue, stay warm, conserve energy. But the cubs did not have 48 hours. They had maybe 6. She thought about her training, about all the rules for survival situations. Protect yourself first. Do not waste resources on lost causes. Maximize your own chances of rescue. Every instructor had drilled those rules into her head. Then she looked at the cubs again. They were crying for their mother, pressed together for warmth that was not enough. They did not understand what had happened. They only knew they were cold and scared and alone. Yuna made her decision. It took her less than 5 seconds. She pulled the thermal blanket from her emergency kit and opened her arms. "Come here, little ones," she whispered in Korean. "I will keep you warm." The cubs seemed to understand. They crawled across the ice floor and pressed against her chest. Yuna wrapped them in the blanket, holding them close to her body. She could feel them shaking, their small hearts beating fast with fear. Her suit's computer immediately warned her that she was losing too much heat. Without the blanket, her core temperature would drop dangerously low. The medical system activated, pumping drugs into her blood. These drugs would slow her heart and lower her body temperature, putting her into a kind of sleep that would help her survive the cold. But those drugs were dangerous. They were only meant to be used for a few days at most. Yuna did not care. She held the cubs closer and felt them begin to relax as her body heat warmed them. Their crying stopped. Their shaking slowed. One of them made a small purring sound and nestled against her neck. "It is okay," she whispered. "You are safe now. I promise, I will not let you die alone." The drugs began to work. Yuna's thoughts became slow and fuzzy. Her heartbeat slowed from 70 beats per minute to 50, then 40, then 30. Her breathing became shallow. The ice cave seemed to grow darker, even though her suit's lights had not changed. The last thing she felt before unconsciousness took her was the 3 cubs sleeping on her chest, warm and safe. She had made her choice. Whatever happened now, at least these innocent lives would not suffer alone in the dark. Above the avalanche, the rescue teams would soon begin searching. But they would not find any sign of life. The snow was too deep, the ice too thick. After a few days, they would give up. They would declare Yuna dead and hold a memorial service. But deep beneath the snow, in a tiny pocket of ice and air, something impossible was beginning to happen. The frost prowler cubs carried something in their crystalline fur. Tiny organisms that could sense when a life was in danger. These organisms began to move from the cub's fur onto Yuna's skin, into her blood, reaching for her cells. They recognized her as the warmth giver, the protector, and they did what their biology commanded them to do. They began to change her, to slow her down even more than the drugs had done, to put her into a state between life and death that no human had ever experienced before. Yuna's heart slowed to 4 beats per hour. Her breathing became one shallow breath every 3 minutes. Her body temperature dropped to levels that should have killed her instantly. But the organisms kept her cells alive, preserving her in a state of suspended animation that defied all medical science. The cubs slept on, warm and safe on her chest. And the long wait began. Part 2. The Vigil. Daeho stared at the empty screen where Yuna's signal should have been. One moment she had been there. A green dot on his monitor showing her position on the mountain. Then the seismic alarms had started screaming, and her dot had vanished like it had never existed at all. He had known what it meant immediately. Avalanche. Massive one. From the readings. And Yuna had been right in its path. He grabbed his emergency radio and started shouting orders. "This is base camp. We have an avalanche on the north slope. Dr. Yuna is caught in it. I need rescue teams now." Within minutes, the settlement exploded into action. People ran to the equipment sheds, pulling out ground-penetrating radar units and emergency rescue gear. The rescue teams were good at their jobs. They had to be. On Varus 4, the environment could kill you in dozens of different ways, and avalanches were one of the most common. Commander Huang reached the command center within 10 minutes. He was an older man with gray hair and a face that had seen too many disasters. He had been a soldier back on Earth before becoming a colony administrator. Now he looked at the seismic data with experienced eyes. "How bad is it?" he asked. Daeho pointed at the screen with a shaking hand. The avalanche covered 16 square kilometers. The snow depth in the impact zone is over 100 meters. And Yuna's beacon is not transmitting. "Could be damaged or just blocked by the ice," the commander said, but his voice did not sound hopeful. "We will find her. Get the teams up there." The first rescue team reached the avalanche site within 2 hours. They set up their equipment and began scanning the snow with ground-penetrating radar. The machines could see through ice and snow, looking for anything that might be a human body or a suit's metal components. They found nothing. More teams arrived as the day wore on. They brought bigger scanners, heat-sensing equipment, and even specially trained dogs from Earth that could smell a person through meters of snow. The dogs ran back and forth across the avalanche field, barking and digging, but they found nothing either. Daeho watched from the command center, his eyes locked on the video feeds from the rescue teams. He kept hoping to see something. Any sign that Yuna had survived. But the mountain gave up no secrets. On the second day, they brought in the heavy equipment. Massive snow-moving machines crawled across the avalanche field like metal insects, digging and searching. They worked around the clock, their lights turning the night into day. The machines dug out tons of snow and ice, creating huge pits across the slope. Still nothing. By the third day, some people were starting to lose hope. The medical officer, Dr. Salmon, came to the command center and spoke quietly with the commander. Even if she survived the initial impact, even if she found an air pocket, she would be running out of oxygen by now. And the cold at those depths would kill her in hours, not days. Daeho wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He had studied the same survival manuals as everyone else. No one could survive this long buried in an avalanche. The cold alone would shut down the human body. The lack of oxygen would cause brain damage even if somehow someone stayed alive. But he could not accept it. This was Yuna. She had survived things that should have killed her before. She was tough, smart, and stubborn. If anyone could beat the odds, it was her. On the fourth day, the rescue team started working in shifts. They were exhausted from 3 days of non-stop searching. Some of them were getting frostbite, despite their thermal suits. The commander ordered rest periods, but Daeho could see the truth in their eyes. They were just going through the motions now. They did not really expect to find her alive anymore. The 5th day brought a heavy storm. Wind howled across the mountain, making rescue work impossible. The teams had to retreat to their shelters and wait it out. Daeho stood at the window of the command center, watching the snow fall and cover the avalanche field with a fresh white blanket. It felt like the mountain was erasing all evidence that Yuna had ever been there. Commander Huang found him there at the window. The old soldier put a hand on Daeho's shoulder. "Son, we have to make a decision. The Colonial Board requires a formal declaration after 5 days without contact, in a presumed fatal incident." "She could still be alive," Daeho said. But even he could hear how weak his words sounded. "I know you want to believe that. I want to believe it too." The commander's voice was heavy with grief. "Yuna was a good woman, a great scientist, and a brave soul. I served with her during the Busan Station disaster 5 years ago. Saw her save 17 people when the reactor started melting down. She was the toughest person I ever met." The commander paused, looking out at the storm. "But even Yuna cannot beat basic physics. The cold, the lack of oxygen, the trauma from the avalanche impact. No human can survive all of that for 5 days." Daeho felt tears on his face but did not wipe them away. "What do we do now?" "We declare her deceased, we hold a memorial service, and we honor her memory by continuing the work she loved." The commander squeezed his shoulder. "I am sorry, Daeho. I truly am." The memorial service was held on the 7th day, in the settlement's main hall. Nearly 300 people attended, almost the entire colony. They came to honor a woman who had dedicated her life to understanding the alien world they now called home. People stood up one by one to share their memories. They talked about Yuna's kindness, her quiet humor, her dedication to her work. Someone told a story about how Yuna had spent 3 weeks caring for an injured bird-like creature, nursing it back to health, even though it kept trying to bite her. The creature had eventually recovered and flown away, but it would return to the research station sometimes, as if checking on the human who had saved it. Daeho spoke last. He told them about Yuna's passion for the frost prowlers, how her eyes would light up when she talked about their intelligence and their family bonds. He mentioned how she would hum old Korean songs when she worked, traditional melodies from Earth that she said reminded her of her grandmother. "Yuna believed that every life mattered," Daeho said to the assembled crowd. "She did not care if something was human or alien, big or small. If it was alive and needed help, she would do everything in her power to protect it. That was who she was." After the service, people came to offer their condolences. They hugged Daeho and shared their own small memories of Yuna. The botanist remembered how she had helped pollinate the greenhouse plants. The teacher talked about how she had visited the school to teach children about Verusian wildlife. The cook mentioned that she always said, "Thank you," even for simple meals. But when everyone else had left, when the hall was empty and quiet, Daeho could not accept that it was over. He went back to his quarters and looked at all the research data Yuna had collected. 6 months of observations on the frost prowler family, hundreds of photos and videos, detailed notes in her precise handwriting. The last entry in her journal was from the morning of the avalanche. She had written, "The mother is finally starting to trust me. I think today might be the day I can get close enough for detailed behavioral observations." This could be a real breakthrough in understanding their social structure. Daeho closed the journal and made a decision. Everyone else might have given up, but he would not. Every day, he would go to the avalanche site and scan the area. He would use portable sensors and look for any sign, any hint that Yuna might still be out there. People thought he was crazy. Dr. Salmon gently suggested that he was in denial, that he needed to accept reality and move through his grief. The commander offered him time off, a chance to return to Earth for a while and process his loss. But Daeho refused it all. He remembered something Yuna had told him once, months ago. They had been sitting in the settlement's small bar, sharing a drink after a long day of work. She had been talking about humanity's exploration of space, about all the dangers and all the reasons people had to give up and go home. "But we do not give up," she had said, her eyes bright with conviction. "That is what makes us human. We survive things that should kill us through pure, stubborn refusal to quit. We face impossible odds and we keep fighting anyway." It is our most annoying trait and our most beautiful one. So Deho kept searching. Every morning, he would pack his equipment and hike to the Avalanche site. He would run his scanners across the snow, looking for heat signatures or metal or anything unusual. He would mark the areas he had searched and plan new search patterns for the next day. The other colonists watched him with pity. They thought he could not let go, that he was trapped in grief. But Deho knew something they did not. He knew that if their positions were reversed, if he was the one buried under the snow, Yuna would never stop looking for him. She would search until she found him or died trying. So he searched through the 8th day, and the 9th, and the 10th. The Avalanche site slowly changed as the weather warmed slightly. The snow began to settle and compress. New snow fell and covered the old. The mountain was healing itself, erasing the scars of the avalanche. But Deho did not stop. He could not stop. Because somewhere in his heart, in a place deeper than logic or reason, he believed that Yuna was still alive. He believed that she had found a way to survive. Because that was what she did. She survived. She persevered. She refused to give up, and if she was still fighting to stay alive out there, then he owed it to her to keep fighting to find her. So the vigil continued. One man against a mountain, searching for a miracle that everyone else had stopped believing in. Part 3. The Impossible Sleep. In the darkness beneath the snow, time had lost all meaning. Yuna existed in a state that was neither life nor death, suspended in a twilight realm that no human had ever experienced before. Her suit's computer had recorded everything in its final moments, before the power failed. The data would have amazed scientists, if anyone had been there to read it. Yuna's heart rate had dropped to 4 beats per hour. Her breathing had slowed to 1 shallow breath every 3 minutes. Her core body temperature had fallen to 15 degrees Celsius, far below what any human should survive. By every medical definition, she should have been dead. Her brain should have shut down from lack of oxygen. Her cells should have frozen and ruptured. Her organs should have failed one by one, until nothing remained but a frozen corpse. But something impossible was happening. The tiny organisms that lived in the frost prowler's crystalline fur had colonized her body. They had entered her bloodstream through her skin, spread through her tissues, and reached every cell. And they had done what their biology programmed them to do: preserve the warmth giver. These organisms were unlike anything human science had discovered. They could manipulate energy at levels so small that human instruments could barely detect them. They could slow down the chemical reactions in cells, putting them into a state of suspension that was neither alive nor dead. In the frost prowlers, this ability helped them survive the brutal winters of Varus IV, when temperatures could drop to lethal levels even for native life. Now those same organisms were working to save Yuna. They had sensed that she was dying, that her body heat was fading, and because she was protecting the cubs, because her body was their source of warmth, the organisms responded. They slowed her metabolism beyond what any technology could achieve. They put her into a hibernation so deep that it resembled death. The 3 cubs slept on her chest, unaware that they were the reason she was still alive. Their small bodies pressed against her, their crystalline fur glowing softly in the darkness. The organisms in their fur formed a bridge to Yuna's body, constantly monitoring her condition, adjusting their activity to keep her cells from dying. But this miracle came with a cost. The organisms needed energy to work, and that energy came from Yuna's own body. Slowly, day by day, she was being consumed from within. Her muscles were breaking down. Her fat reserves were being used up. She was wasting away in the darkness, becoming thinner and weaker, even as the organisms kept her technically alive. On the 5th day, something else happened. The mother frost prowler had survived the avalanche. She had been thrown clear of the main impact zone and had immediately begun searching for her cubs. Using senses that humans did not fully understand, she had tracked them through the snow and ice. She found a crack in the avalanche debris, a narrow tunnel that led down into the darkness. It was too small for her adult body, but she could reach into it. She had killed an ice krill, one of the small creatures that burrowed through the snow. She had partially digested it in her own stomach, breaking it down into a form her cubs could eat. Then she had pushed it through the crack and called to her cubs with a low whistling sound. The cubs woke at their mother's call. They crawled away from Yuna's chest and found the food their mother had provided. They ate eagerly, their small teeth tearing at the processed meat. And because they were young and their instincts were strong, they brought some of it back to Yuna. They pushed the food against her mouth, making small crying sounds. In their simple understanding, they knew that Yuna needed to eat, just as they did. The organisms in their fur carried simple chemical signals that told them the warmth giver was hungry. Yuna's body responded on an instinctive level. Her mouth opened slightly, and some of the partially digested ice krill slipped between her lips. Her throat worked in a slow, automatic swallow. The food entered her stomach, where it was slowly digested and absorbed. It was barely anything, a few grams of protein and fat. But it was enough to keep her from starving completely. It gave the organisms a little more energy to work with, a little more fuel to keep her cells suspended. This pattern repeated every few days. The mother prowler would bring food and push it through the crack. The cubs would eat and then share with Yuna. It was not much, but it was keeping her alive in a way that should have been impossible. 20 days had passed since the avalanche. 20 days of frozen darkness, of near-death suspension, of existence in a state between worlds. Yuna's consciousness flickered occasionally, like a candle flame in a deep cave. In those brief moments of awareness, she could feel the cubs sleeping on her chest. She could sense their warmth, their trust, their complete faith that she would protect them. And even in her near-death state, some part of her was aware that she had to keep fighting. She could not die, because if she died, the cubs would lose their warmth. They would freeze in the darkness, alone and afraid. That thought, more than anything else, kept some tiny spark of will burning in the depths of her mind. The organisms sensed this will. They responded to it, adjusting their activity to support it. They were simple life forms, barely more than biological machines, but they could sense purpose and determination, and they worked harder to preserve the human who carried such strength of spirit. On the 23rd day, Yuna experienced something like a dream. In her suspended state, her brain had minimal activity, but occasionally neurons would fire and create fragments of thought and memory. She dreamed of Earth, of the mountains in Korea where she had grown up. She remembered hiking with her grandmother, an old woman who had taught her to respect nature and all living things. Her grandmother had told her stories about the old days, about how humans and animals had once lived in closer harmony. "Every life is precious, Yuna," her grandmother had said. "From the smallest insect to the largest whale. We are all part of the same web, all connected. When you protect another life, you protect part of yourself." In the dream, Yuna felt her grandmother's hand in hers, warm and strong. "You did the right thing, child," the old woman said. "You chose compassion over survival. That is what makes us truly human." Then the dream faded, and Yuna sank back into the darkness. But something had changed. The organisms in her body sensed a shift in her brain activity, a tiny increase in neural function. They adjusted their work, allowing slightly more activity in her brain, while still keeping her in suspended animation. Outside the ice pocket, the world was changing. The long winter of Varus IV was slowly giving way to spring. The temperatures were rising, just a few degrees, but enough to make a difference. The snow was beginning to settle and compress. Deep within the avalanche, the ice was starting to shift. The crack that the mother prowler used to feed her cubs was getting wider. More air was flowing into the ice pocket. The temperature was rising slowly, degree by degree. These changes were small, almost invisible, but they were happening. The cubs were growing. They were larger now than when the Avalanche had first trapped them. They had survived because of Yuna's sacrifice, and they were thriving despite the impossible circumstances. They still slept on her chest every night, pressing against her for warmth and comfort. But now, they also groomed her, licking her face and hands with their rough tongues. They would arrange themselves around her to keep her warmest, adjusting their positions with an intelligence that seemed beyond their young age. The organisms in their fur had taught them, in a way. Chemical signals passed between the cubs and Yuna, carrying simple information. Protect the warmth giver. Keep her safe. She is family now. And in some deep, unconscious part of her mind, Yuna understood. She was not alone in the darkness. She had 3 small lives depending on her, trusting her, loving her in their simple animal way. That bond, that connection across species, was keeping her anchored to life. On the 26th day, the mother prowler pushed her head through the widening crack. She could not fit her whole body through, but she could see into the ice pocket now. She saw her cubs, healthy and alive, sleeping on the chest of the strange, furless creature who had protected them. The mother prowler made a low sound, a vibration that humans could not hear but that carried meaning in the frost prowler language. It was a sound of gratitude, of recognition, of debt, acknowledged. This human had saved her children when she could not. This human had chosen their lives over her own survival. The mother prowler would remember, and when the time came, she would repay this debt. For now, she continued to bring food through the crack. She continued to call to her cubs and listen to their answering chirps, and she waited for the spring thaw, for the moment when the ice would melt enough for her to reach her children and bring them back to the surface. Deep in her suspended state, Yuna's heart beat 4 times in an hour. Her lungs drew 1 shallow breath every 3 minutes. Her body temperature remained impossibly low. But she was still alive, still fighting, still holding on. The cubs slept peacefully on her chest, their crystalline fur pulsing with a soft light that pushed back the darkness. In the frozen tomb beneath the avalanche, life persisted against all logic and reason, and slowly, one microscopic adjustment at a time, the organisms were learning how to keep a human alive in ways that no science could explain. They were creating a new form of symbiosis, a bridge between species that had never existed before. Yuna Kim was becoming something unprecedented. Not quite human anymore, but not fully changed either. Something in between, something new. A woman who had chosen compassion over survival and had been transformed by that choice in ways she could not yet understand. Above the avalanche, Daeho continued his lonely search, not knowing that the miracle he hoped for was actually happening in the darkness below. The impossible was becoming real. 1 heartbeat at a time. Part 4. The Thaw. The scanner beeped, and Daeho almost ignored it. He had heard false signals dozens of times over the past weeks. Usually, it was just a rock formation or a pocket of warmer air in the snow. But something made him stop and look at the display. There was a heat signature 40 meters below the surface. It was faint, barely registering, but it was there. And it was not moving like air or water would. It was steady, concentrated in one small area. Daeho's hands started shaking. He ran the scan 3 more times to make sure. Each time, the signature appeared in the same location. Something was generating heat down there. Something that had been buried for 29 days. He grabbed his radio with trembling fingers. Base, this is Daeho. I have a possible contact. North Slope, Sector 7. I need an excavation team immediately. There was a pause on the other end. Then Commander Huang's voice came through, careful and gentle. Daeho, we have been over this. The chances of finding anything alive after this long are, I know what the chances are, Daeho shouted into the radio. But I have a heat signature here. Please, just send a team. If I am wrong, I will stop searching. I promise. Just this one last time. Another pause. Then the commander sighed. All right, One last time. I will send a team. The excavation crew arrived within an hour. They set up their equipment and began drilling down through the compressed snow and ice. It was slow work. The avalanche debris had frozen solid over the past month, turning into something almost as hard as rock. Deho watched every meter of their progress, his heart pounding. The crew worked in shifts, drilling and clearing. Drilling and clearing. Hour after hour, they went deeper into the mountain. 30 meters, the crew chief called out. Still nothing but ice. Keep going, Deho said. Please. At 35 meters, the drill bit broke through into empty space. Air rushed up from the hole, carrying a strange smell that Deho could not identify. The crew chief looked at Deho with wide eyes. There is a cavity down there, he said. A good-sized one. They widened the hole carefully, using smaller tools now to avoid causing a collapse. At 38 meters, they broke through. Completely. The crew chief shined a light down into the darkness and then went very still. Oh my God, he whispered. Deho pushed forward and looked down into the hole. In the beam of the flashlight, he could see an ice cave about 2 meters across, and lying on the floor of that cave was a figure in a thermal suit, covered in frost. 3 small animals were curled up on the figure's chest, sleeping peacefully. Their fur glowed with a soft crystalline light. Yuna, Deho breathed. Then he was shouting into his radio. Medical team. I need a medical team right now. We found her. She is here. The crew worked frantically to widen the opening. They lowered ropes and climbing equipment into the cave. Deho insisted on being the first one down. Despite the crew chief's protests, he rappelled down the rope, his feet touching the ice floor of the cave within seconds. Up close, Yuna looked like a corpse. Her face was blue-white, her lips the color of frost. Ice crystals covered her eyelashes. She was not moving, not visibly breathing, but the 3 frost prowler cubs were alive and healthy. They looked up at Deho with curious eyes as he approached. They did not run away. Instead, they pressed closer to Yuna, as if protecting her. Deho reached out with a shaking hand and touched Yuna's neck, feeling for a pulse. For a long moment, he felt nothing. His heart sank. They had found her, but they were too late. Then he felt it. A pulse. So slow and faint that he almost missed it. 1 beat. Then nothing for a long time. Then another beat. She is alive, he said, his voice breaking. She is still alive. The medical team arrived and took over. Dr. Salmon came down into the cave and immediately began scanning Yuna with her instruments. Her face showed shock as she read the results. This is impossible, Salmon muttered. Her core temperature is 15 degrees. Her heart rate is 3 beats per minute. Her brain activity is almost flatlined. She should be dead 20 times over. But she is alive? Deho asked desperately. Salmon looked at him with wonder in her eyes. Yes. Somehow, she is alive. They tried to move Yuna, but the cubs became agitated. They hissed and cried, refusing to leave her side. When the medical team tried to pull them away, the cubs' distress seemed to affect Yuna. Her already slow heart rate dropped even further. Stop, Salmon ordered. Leave them with her. Whatever is keeping her alive, these animals are part of it. They carefully lifted Yuna and the cubs together, keeping them in contact. They brought her up through the hole in a special rescue basket, moving slowly to avoid jarring her. The cubs stayed pressed against her chest the whole time, their crystalline fur pulsing with light. The medical bay at the settlement had been prepared for a dead body recovery. Instead, the staff found themselves dealing with the most unusual patient any of them had ever seen. They placed Yuna in the intensive care unit, with the cubs in special incubators right next to her bed. But when they separated the cubs from Yuna, her vital signs immediately started to decline. Her heart rate dropped. Her body temperature fell. Alarms began sounding on the medical monitors. Put them back, Salmon ordered. Put them on her chest, Right now. The nurses carefully placed the cubs back on Yuna's chest. Within minutes, her vitals stabilized. The cubs settled down and went to sleep, their small bodies rising and falling with her slow breathing. Salmon ran every test she could think of. Blood samples, tissue scans, brain activity monitors. The results were unlike anything in medical literature. Yuna's blood contained organisms that should not exist in a human body. Her cells showed chemical markers that were completely foreign. Her metabolism was functioning at levels that defied explanation. There is something in her system, Salmon told Commander Huang and Deho. Organisms from the frost prowlers. They are in her bloodstream, her tissues, everywhere. They have put her into some kind of hibernation state. It is the only reason she is still alive. Can you remove them? The commander asked. I do not know. I am not even sure if we should. Right now, they are the only thing keeping her alive. If we try to remove them, she might die immediately. They decided to wait and watch. Slowly, carefully, they began to raise Yuna's body temperature. They increased it by 1 degree every 6 hours, monitoring her constantly. The organisms in her system seemed to respond to the warming, adjusting their activity levels. On the second day after her rescue, Yuna's heart rate increased to 10 beats per minute. On the third day, it was 20. Her breathing became more regular. The blue tint started to fade from her skin, but she did not wake up. She remained in a deep unconsciousness that the doctors could not explain. Her brain showed activity, but it was minimal, barely enough to sustain basic functions. Deho spent every moment he could at her bedside. He talked to her, telling her about the settlement, about the rescue, about how the entire colony was praying for her recovery. He did not know if she could hear him, but he talked anyway. The cubs grew comfortable with the medical staff. They would let nurses approach to check on Yuna, though they never left her chest for long. They would eat the food that was brought for them, always bringing small pieces back to Yuna's mouth in case she could eat. Dr. Salmon studied this behavior with fascination. They are trying to feed her, she said, just like they must have done while they were buried. This is how she survived for so long. The mother prowler brought food. The cubs shared it with Yuna. On the fourth day, something changed. Yuna's eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched. The monitors showed increased brain activity. The medical staff rushed to her bedside, but they were afraid to hope. Then, slowly, Yuna's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, confused and disoriented. She looked around the medical bay without seeming to recognize where she was. Her gaze passed over Deho, over Dr. Salmon, over the nurses and equipment. Then she looked down at her chest and saw the 3 cubs sleeping peacefully. Her eyes focused. Understanding came into them, and she smiled. A weak but genuine smile. Are they okay? She whispered, her voice rough from weeks of disuse. The cubs? Are they safe? Deho felt tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling too. They are safe, Yuna. Because of you, they are safe. Yuna's smile widened slightly. Then her eyes closed again. But this time, it was normal sleep. Healing sleep. Her breathing was steady. Her heart rate stable. The monitors showed healthy patterns. Dr. Salmon checked her vital signs and looked up with wonder. She is going to be all right, she said softly. I do not know how, but she is going to survive this. News of Yuna's awakening spread through the settlement like wildfire. People who had mourned her death now celebrated her impossible survival. The story spread beyond Varus 4, transmitted to other colonies, and eventually back to Earth. The woman who had survived 29 days buried in an avalanche. The woman who had chosen to protect alien cubs over her own survival became famous across human space, but Yuna did not care about any of that. When she woke up again several hours later, more alert this time, she only wanted to know about the cubs. She asked about their health, whether they were eating well, if they were showing any signs of trauma. They are fine, Deho assured her. Better than fine. They are healthy and growing, and they will not leave your side. Yuna looked down at the cubs and gently stroked their crystalline fur. They purred at her touch, a sound like wind chimes in a breeze. Thank you, she whispered to them in Korean. Thank you for keeping me alive. Thank you for staying with me in the dark. The cubs seemed to understand. They pressed closer to her, their fur glowing brighter. And in that moment, everyone in the medical bay understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Not just a survival story, but a bond between species that had never existed before. Yuna Kim had crossed a threshold that no human had ever crossed. She had given everything to protect innocent lives. And she had been transformed by that choice. She was still human, but she was something more now as well. She carried within her a bridge between species, a connection that would change how humanity understood life in the universe. And it had all started with one simple, impossible choice: to care for others even when caring meant certain death. Part 5. What humanity means. The news spread across human space faster than anyone expected. Within a week, Yuna's story had reached all 11 colonized star systems. Within 2 weeks, it had become the most talked about event in recent memory. The woman who survived 29 days, buried alive. The scientist who chose alien cubs over her own life. The human who had bonded with an alien species in a way no one had thought possible. Scientists wanted to study her immediately. Research institutes across human space sent requests for access. Universities wanted tissue samples. Military researchers wanted to understand the organisms in her blood. Corporate labs wanted to patent whatever they could find. Everyone had ideas about what should be done with Dr. Yuna Kim. But Yuna was not interested in being studied like a laboratory specimen. She was recovering slowly in the medical bay, regaining her strength day by day. The organisms in her system had changed her in ways that doctors were still trying to understand. Her metabolism was different now. Her body temperature ran slightly cooler than normal. She healed faster than she should, and she seemed to need less oxygen than before. You are not quite human anymore, Dr. Salmon told her gently during one examination. But you are not quite something else either. You are in between. Something new. Yuna looked at the 3 cubs sleeping in their enclosure next to her bed. They had grown larger in the weeks since the rescue. Their crystalline fur was brighter and more beautiful than ever. I do not feel different, she said. I still think like me. I still remember everything I was before. Your mind is the same, Salmon agreed. But your body has been changed at the cellular level. The organisms from the cubs are still in your system. They seem to be permanent now, part of your biology. We tried to remove some of them in testing, and your body immediately started producing more. So, I am stuck with them? I would not say stuck. They are keeping you healthier than you would be otherwise. Your immune system is stronger. Your cells repair damage more efficiently. In some ways, you are better than you were before. Salmon paused. But yes, they are permanent. You and these organisms are bonded now. Symbiotic. Yuna considered this for a long moment. Then she smiled. Good. They saved my life. I am happy to share my body with them. Then presenter. Then he persons morment. Then he saventanger. They wan. Then he persons morment. Then he persons morment. They wan presenter. Then he persons morment. The scientific community did not share her casual acceptance. Research papers were published, arguing about the implications. Some scientists said Yuna represented the future of human evolution, a voluntary symbiosis with alien life that could help humanity adapt to harsh worlds. Others warned that she was contaminated, possibly dangerous, a threat to pure human biology. The arguments got nasty. People who had never met Yuna wrote papers calling her Subject Kim and debated whether she should be quarantined. Some suggested she should be prevented from having children to avoid spreading the organisms. Others wanted her brought to research stations for intensive study, regardless of her wishes. End of view. Commander Huang protected her as much as he could. He refused all requests for access to Yuna unless she personally approved them. He made it clear that she was a citizen of the colony with full rights, not a research specimen to be poked and prodded. But the pressure kept building. The colonial board sent official requests. Research institutes offered huge amounts of money. Even some governments got involved, claiming they had the right to study anything that might affect human survival in space. Finally, Yuna had enough. 2 months after her rescue, she called a press conference. It was broadcast live across all human colonies, reaching millions of people. She sat at a simple table in the settlement's main hall. She wore normal clothes, not a medical gown. The 3 frost prowler cubs sat calmly at her feet, looking up at the cameras with curious eyes. Yuna looked thin but healthy, her eyes clear and strong. "I have read many of the papers written about me," she began, speaking in clear, simple language. "I have seen what people are saying. Some call me a hero. Some call me contaminated. Some call me Subject Kim, as if I am not a person anymore but just a thing to be studied." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want to tell you what really happened on that mountain, and what it means. Not as a scientist or a subject, but as a human being." Yuna told the story simply and honestly. The avalanche. The decision to save the cubs. The long darkness. The slow hibernation. The rescue. She did not try to make herself sound brave or special. She just explained what had happened, step by step. "When I found those cubs in the ice cave, I had a choice," she said. "I could use my emergency equipment to maximize my own survival, or I could use it to keep 3 innocent lives warm. The logical choice was obvious. Save myself. Humans are more important than animals. My life has more value than theirs. And people die." She looked directly at the camera. "But I could not make that choice. I looked at those cubs, terrified and alone. And I knew that letting them freeze to death was not something I could live with. Even if it meant I would die, I could not abandon them." Yuna reached down and stroked one of the cubs. It purred and pressed against her hand. "That choice is what makes humanity special. Not our intelligence. Not our technology. Not our ability to conquer worlds and build cities. What makes us special is our ability to choose compassion, even when it costs us everything." She continued, her voice gaining strength. "The organisms in my body did not save me because I am human. They saved me because their biology recognized something in my actions. I was protecting their cubs, acting as family, providing warmth and safety. They responded to that. They responded to the choice to care." Yuna stood up, and the cubs stood with her. "So, to all the scientists who want to study me, who want to understand the organisms, who want to replicate what happened, I have this to say. The miracle was not the biology. The miracle was the choice. You can study the organisms all you want, but you will never create this symbiosis by force. It only happened because I chose to protect lives that were not my own." She looked around the room at the assembled reporters and cameras. "We are meeting new forms of life, discovering new worlds, pushing into territories we do not understand, and we have a choice about what kind of species we want to be. Do we want to be conquerors who only value our own lives? Or do we want to be protectors who see value in all life, human or alien?" Yuna's voice became softer but more intense. "When the snow melted and they found me, the cubs were still sleeping on my chest, still trusting me, still believing I would protect them. That trust across species, that bond of care and protection, that is worth more than any scientific discovery. That is what humanity should be bringing to the universe." Quote, she sat back down, and the cubs climbed into her lap. "I am not a hero. I am not a subject. I am just someone who made a choice that any decent person would make. I chose not to let innocent lives die alone in the dark. And if that makes me less human in some people's eyes, then I am proud to be less human." The press conference ended, but Yuna's words spread across human space. They were quoted in news articles, discussed in university classes, debated in government chambers, The conversation about her changed. People stopped calling her Subject Kim and started calling her by her name again. More importantly, her story changed how humans thought about the alien life they encountered. Colonies that had been focused only on exploitation started creating wildlife protection programs. Scientists began studying alien species with more respect and less desire to control them. The frost prowlers of Varus IV became a protected species, with severe penalties for harming them. Yuna herself went back to her research work as soon as she was fully recovered. She continued studying the frost prowlers, but now with a unique advantage. The mother prowler recognized her and allowed her close access to the family. Other prowler families in the area seemed to sense something different about Yuna and were less afraid of her than they were of other humans. The 3 cubs she had saved stayed with her. They were too bonded to her now to return fully to the wild. They lived in a special enclosure, attached to her quarters, but they spent most of their time with her. They followed her on research trips, played in her office, and slept curled up on her bed at night. "They are your children now," Deho said one day, watching the cubs play fight in the snow outside the research station. Yuna smiled. "I suppose they are. Not the children I expected to have, but mine, nonetheless." Months passed, then a year. Yuna's story faded from the headlines as new events captured public attention. But the impact of what she had done remained. Human colonies across space adopted new policies for interacting with alien life. Scientists developed new protocols that prioritized understanding and cooperation over exploitation. And on Varus IV, in the settlement of New Gangwon, Dr. Yuna Kim continued her work. She published papers on frost prowler behavior that revolutionized understanding of alien intelligence. She trained other researchers in ethical approaches to xenobiology. She became a teacher and an advocate for treating all life with respect. The organisms in her body remained, a permanent reminder of the choice she had made. They gave her abilities that no other human possessed. She could survive in colder temperatures than others. She healed from injuries faster. She seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the frost prowlers that went beyond normal observation, but she never let those abilities define her. She was still Yuna Kim, the quiet scientist who hummed Korean folk songs while she worked. She was still the woman who cared more about understanding life than controlling it. She was still the person who had looked at 3 terrified cubs and chosen compassion over survival. Deho remained her closest friend and research partner. He had never stopped believing she was alive during those 29 days of searching. Now he worked beside her every day, documenting the ongoing symbiosis between human and alien organisms, studying what Yuna had become. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her one evening as they watched the sunset over the mountains. "The choice you made? Everything it cost you?" Yuna looked at the 3 cubs playing in the snow nearby. They had grown into beautiful adults now, their crystalline fur catching the fading light like living rainbows. They were strong and healthy, thriving in their natural environment, but choosing to stay near the human who had saved them. "No," she said simply. "I have never regretted it for a single moment. Those cubs are alive because of my choice. That bond we share, that trust, it is the most valuable thing I have ever created. More valuable than any research paper or scientific discovery." She smiled at Deho. "We came to the stars to find new life and new worlds. But the real discovery is not what we find out here. It is what we find inside ourselves, our capacity for compassion, for sacrifice, for caring about lives that are different from ours. That is what humanity brings to the universe. That is what makes us special." The sun set over Titan's Reach, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. The 3 frost prowlers called to their mother somewhere in the distance, and she answered with her low, whistling cry. The settlement's lights began to glow in the gathering darkness, and Yuna Kim stood in the cold, watching the world she had almost died to protect, knowing that she had done something that mattered. She had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not its ability to survive, but its willingness to help others survive. even at terrible cost. In the end, that was what humanity fuck yeah truly meant. Not conquest or domination, not superiority or power, but the simple, radical choice to care when caring defied all logic, to protect the vulnerable when protection meant risking everything, to choose compassion over survival and to be transformed by that choice. Yuna had made that choice in a frozen cave beneath an avalanche, and the universe had been changed by it, one small act of kindness rippling outward across the stars, reminding everyone who heard the story what humanity could be at its very best. The three cubs came to her side, pressing against her legs. She reached down and stroked their crystalline fur, feeling the warmth of the bond they shared. Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other humans on other worlds heard her story and understood. They understood that the future of humanity among the stars would not be built on weapons or technology alone. It would be built on choices like the one Yuna made, choices to care, to protect, to sacrifice for others. That was humanity's true gift to the universe. And it was enough.